Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. Whew, very hot. So in today's video I am going to talk to you about some of the books that have just stuck in my brain. These are the sort of books that you read and you keep thinking about again and again, whether it is specific incidents or themes and ideas that came up in these books. They will not leave your head and they might just fuck you up a little bit. So I have 10 books to talk to you about. Some of them are a bit weirder than others, but all of them have stuck in my brain ever since I read them. And I think if you want that kind of earworm of a book, these would be good for you. The first one I want to talk about is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And this is quite a short novella which was translated from the Korean by Deborah White. And it's a very well-known book, so I'm sure you will have heard of it. And the basic premise of the story is that there is a woman who decides to give up meat after she has a terrible dream. And her family are really against this. Her stopping eating meat does turn into kind of an eating disorder. And we see this from three different perspectives. From the perspective of her husband, her brother-in-law and her sister. And we see the ways that they all try to control and take over her life. It is very much rooted in the South Korean cultural context, in terms of meat eating being a big part of the culture, and also in terms of a woman's position and place and the expectations of society places on a woman. But I think that these things can be understood more broadly, even if you aren't from a South Korean culture, as obviously I am not. And this was a book, as I said, that really stuck with me because of the strangeness of the imagery. It's incredibly beautifully written in the second and third parts. The first part I actually found quite hard to get through because I found the writing so annoying. But once I got to the second part and the strange, haunting beauty of that, I realised that that was on purpose from the first perspective, because it's from the perspective of her husband, who is really a terrible person. That part of the book feeling very uncomfortable, there was no place to relax, and I think that that's what really is interesting about this style of writing, is that I felt so compelled to read it and I found it really hard to put down and I just wanted to keep going, but at the same time I was so uncomfortable the whole time. It really had a lot of tension throughout it, really uncomfortable, unlikable characters, and moments of violence and things that are creepy and weird being pushed quite far to make you feel very uncomfortable. And I think that that was the point of the book. It is a book that is filled with discomfort and really gets under your skin in that way. Enjoyed is probably the wrong word, but it was very powerful, and I thought that the book was very good because of that. It also was a book that married that discomfort with some beautiful imagery and of nature throughout the second and third parts. And so that juxtaposition of the beauty and the discomfort, I think, was done really well and is one of the things that made it stick with me. The next book on my list is The Discomfort of Evening by Marieke Lucas Rijneveld. This one was translated from the Dutch, although I cannot remember the name of the translator. This is another deceptively simple book. It tells the story of a young girl who has recently lost her brother in an ice skating accident. They live in a small, isolated, very strictly Christian community in rural Netherlands. It is about the family and their dealing with this grief, the ways that they don't talk to one another or communicate it, and the ways that it comes out in very strange and again very uncomfortable ways. It is also about this community with very strict hierarchies and gender ideas of gender and gender roles that plays into these acts of violence, and a community where nothing is talked about. It has some really, really incredibly uncomfortable scenes in it involving things like animal torture. So with all of these books, I would definitely look up trigger warnings if that is something that you need. But what I really enjoyed again is the wrong word, but what really impressed me about this book was the cold and detached nature of the writing, which is not something that I have enjoyed necessarily always, but really worked for me in this book. It felt so realistic to the character because it's being told from this first person perspective, that disassociation from what is going on around her, and the horror of it being laid out so matter-of-factly because our main character is not allowing herself to be fully embodied while she experiences these terrible things. And I think it's done so well that it feels horrific and you feel the tension and the shock of it more than the character does, which allows her to continue going further and to make it even more uncomfortable. And I really thought that that was very powerfully done. It is a book that made me have a physical reaction to it. Again, I had to stop walking. I was listening to the audiobook because I was so it had such a serious impact on me, a certain scene within the middle of the book. It was so unexpected and it felt really uncomfortable, but I think was done exactly right, pitched right, and I really think it is a book worth reading. Another book with a kind of detached, weird writing style that has really stuck with me in my brain is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This was one of my favourite books last year, and I read it quite near the end of last year, and it tells the story of a woman whose wife went on a mission in a submarine and has come back completely changed. She took longer to come back than she was supposed to, and we don't really know what was going on in the submarine. But she's now home, and she likes to spend all day in the bath and drink salt water, and something about her is different, and their relationship is falling apart because of this. They can't connect. There is some sort of barrier between the two of them. It is told in alternating chapters also, where we see the experience of the wife who went in the submarine during her time on this submarine mission, and the strange discomfort. And again, not a lot happens in either of these sections because they are just at the bottom of the sea with just the people who are on the submarine, and something has gone wrong but they're not sure what or why. This book was so beautifully written, and it had a lot of really wonderful imagery, the imagery of the water and the feeling of grief and of losing someone who is still there in a way. There was, I think, a lot of emotion going through this book, a lot of confusion and discomfort, and it moved through until the end, which I thought was just so wonderfully done with beautiful imagery, and it really, really moved me. It was one of the few books that made me cry last year. I'm not a huge book crier, but when nothing much was happening, we were just really sitting with our characters and with their feelings that were not always comfortable, were not always what would be considered the right response. There was a lot of anger towards the wife, who was clearly sick, and I thought it was just a really interesting exploration of things like grief and loss, and being there for someone who does not seem to be capable of the relationship anymore. As I said, I found it really moving, and it's a very small book again, where there is so much, I think, for you as the reader to read into the book, and I really, really enjoyed it. A Japanese classic that really got into my brain is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima. This is set after the Second World War in Japan, and it is about a group of boys who feel disillusioned with the world, and as if no one is telling them the truth and everything is pretending and a facade. One of the boys wishes to be a sailor, and when his mother starts up a relationship with a sailor, he idolises this man and thinks that he could be their saviour, basically, the person who is with understanding of the truth of the world that they can't get from anywhere else. But as they slowly get to know more about that sailor, they again become disillusioned. They see that he does not hold up the standards that they wish that he did, that he didn't even know he was being tested for, and things take a very dark turn. This is another book that is very slow moving and kind of creepy. There is this adolescent coming of age obsession with power and sex and dynamics between people. These boys seem so young and incredibly naive, and yet also so capable of violence and aggression. There is a feeling of control and coercive control by one of the boys in this group, and these boys wanting so much for approval, both from the boy who is the leader of their group and also this sailor. They are trying to understand the world, and they are struggling. There is an overshadow of a lot of violence and a lot of decay as well. There are a lot of the places where they spend time are places that have been abandoned or destroyed during the war, and there is an element of that feeling of history hanging over the book, of the violence that Japan enacted and was enacted against Japan as well. It's another book that is very short and with not a lot of actual action, but the minute descriptions of a lot of the really disturbing moments, I feel like are part of what stuck with me, and also the mundanity of it. There is so much boredom in this book, there is so much sitting around and waiting, and that allowed for the moments that are active to feel a lot more powerful. The slow, deliberate and pointless nature of their violence. And I think that this is a really powerful book. There are moments in this book specifically that I can think of that just reoccur to me occasionally, and I think therefore must have been so powerful and to have stuck with me for that long. Last year I also read Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. And this is about a woman whose mother has been diagnosed with dementia, and so she starts to take care of her. However, they had a really fractious, difficult relationship. Her mother was abusive in a very negligent way and put her daughter into situations that were dangerous for her with a kind of negligence, a lack of care, and has also been a liar and very controlling. And so her daughter now is unsure how to care for her, and also very suspicious of her and all of her motives and why she needs to move in with them. Is she really suffering with dementia, or is this another ploy? The daughter is an artist, and there is something that happened in her past that is she is redrawing the same face over and over again without looking at the previous drawing, and that is part of her art. And a lot of it is about rumination and memory and thinking back again, over and over again, of what happened, trying to come to some sort of understanding. Her mother was in an ashram at one point, with a kind of charismatic leader situation, and also in a relationship with a man whose relationship with the daughter is very uncomfortable. And again, it is a book where not a lot happens. It feels very slow, but there are these deliberate acts, or these specific points of spark, I guess, where the feeling of tension and apprehension and discomfort between the characters comes to a head and then doesn't resolve in a way that feels comfortable. Almost always missing that catharsis is never allowed. And the ending, again, it was something that made you re-question the whole of the book. It is a very disorientating and very uncomfortable book. I really enjoyed that. I think that books like these that really sit in the discomfort are part of the reasons that they stuck with me for so long. They are not casual or easy books, despite a lot of them being very short. Including Burnt Sugar, but it had a lot of depth and a lot of things to reconsider and rethink. Another one I read last year, I seem to have read a lot of these last year, was Keeping the House by Tice. This is set in North London in a Turkish and Turkish Cypriot community, and between two different time periods. One is the 1990s and one is the early 2000s. A woman's partner has recently gone to jail, and he has a amount of heroin in Turkey that he wants to smuggle into London, and she is kind of in charge of smuggling that in for him. And we also followed the woman's daughter as she grows up in this North London community. It is a really interesting book in terms of narrative style, because it is, like I said, set between two time periods, but there's never any demarcation as to which time period you're in. You have to kind of work it out by the characters and their ages. And it's also very much jumps straight into the middle of scenes set throughout this community. So you feel very disorientated a lot of the time while you are reading it, but at the same time it feels very like visual and very like a TV show, which I think made it easier to follow. All of the different scenes are kind of little vignettes of this culture and of this time period that build up a story together, and so you have to just sort of allow the vignette to happen, and then it will slowly build up until it makes more sense. It also is, in terms of the layout of the text, there are moments of Turkish words being used by our characters where the translations are squeezed in to the margins, and so it feels very informal and very much like it is talking to you. It is a book with a lot of humour as well. I found it very funny in a very dark kind of way, because it is dealing with crime and organised crime, but it is dealing with like incompetency and also with the like interactions with groups of people who know each other very well and rub each other up the wrong way in a way that feels so human. I feel like all of the groups, particularly the blokes hanging out in the corner shops and things, their relationships with one another and the things that they need to get done, there's a lot of humour there, and at the same time all of the characters feel so well fleshed out. There is still, again, darkness and violence, sexual violence against women and girls and things throughout the book, so it is not a book without seriousness, but I love the touch of humour that is added to it. I think it brings such balance to the book, and it makes it feel more grounded and real. Like I said, it's very, very funny, very dark and very visual, one that I could really see as a TV series, and I really think they should do that. Another modern classic that fits in with this is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That is what this book is, even if you can't see it on the front. This is one of the best known pieces of magical realism, and I think for me magical realism is a genre that has a tendency to really stick with me. This tells the story of the Buendia family, who are in this small unnamed South American country as they travel through to found this city and the American capitalist imperialism with a fruit factory, and also of the dirty wars of the 20th century, fictionalized in this kind of almost fairy tale way. It's a very strange book wherein a lot of the characters have exactly the same name, and a lot of themes and things that happen in the past repeat and repeat throughout. There is a lot of times where people nearly sleep with their relatives, and it is about the silences and the things that we hide from each other and how that can doom us to repeat it. It is all set around this one house for the most part, for where the Buendia family live. The tragedies that they get themselves into for fighting for independence for their country, and through moments of interpersonal violence as well. It is a big world and a very visual world as well. The elements of magic that are throughout here feel very visual, and it's those things that have stuck with me. For example, when one of the sons dies, his blood travels through the town until it lands at his mother's feet, and she bursts into tears. A lot of the time, the magic and the strangeness comes from the violence and the strangeness of the world itself. It is another book where the structure of it makes it a little discombobulating, and I think that's another theme of things that stick with me, are books where you have to work and really concentrate, so that it is quite hard to keep timelines in your head, and as everyone has the same name, it can be literally there is one guy who has like 27 sons and names them all his name. And so obviously that is quite difficult to keep everything straight in your head. It is a book that you have to let wash over you. You can't expect to properly, literally understand everything. Once you get into the slantwise way of looking at the world, it becomes a lot easier to read. And I think that's one of the reasons that it sticks with in your head so much, is that you have to really absorb yourself in this world and really immerse yourself in the reading. Another book with an element of magical realism is A General Theory of Oblivion by Jose Eduardo Agualusa. This one is set in Angola during the Angolan fight for independence, and we follow a woman who leaves Portugal because she was brutally gang raped and ends up, that is not on the page, but we are told about it, and she ends up living with her sister and her husband in Angola on the eve of a fight for independence. Her brother-in-law is involved in diamonds in some way, and at the beginning of the book, her sister and her brother-in-law flee Angola for Portugal to flee the violence, but also there is something about some missing diamonds, and did they take them with them? When the violence starts, our main character bricks herself into the apartment, and so she lives there for decades without any access to the outside world. She grows plants on her balcony and drinks rainwater, and although that seems very kind of part of the magical realism, that is actually based on a true story. So this is another book where there is the absurdity of reality is matched by magic that everyone takes at face value and nobody seems to think is strange. For example, there is a singing pygmy hippopotamus. And it is another book that deals with a lot of darkness, again, organised crime, trying to find these diamonds, and the upheaval of a fight for independence followed by a dictatorship. And so political violence abounds, and again, the strangeness of never knowing where you are supposed to be, and the strangeness of this woman coming out of her apartment into this world that has completely changed from where it was to begin with. It is another one with really beautiful writing, and again, a lot of humour, a lot of incompetent criminals being outsmarted by children and things that feel very absurdist. So both the magic and the humour and the violence, everything is absurd and strange and nothing quite makes sense. And I think that is the theme of this list. These books deal with strangeness and in terms of their form are not always easy to follow, but I think that makes them great books that really stick with you. Another book like this is The Manningtree Witches by A.K. Blakemore. This is in an entirely different setting. This is a piece of historical fiction set in 17th century England in Essex during the Witchfinder General's lookout for witches during the English Civil War. And we are in a really impoverished rural community, and particularly the women are very impoverished, and there are a lot of them without men because the English Civil War took so many men away from their homes to fight in this campaign. Women are left to their own devices and are trying to find a way to survive through this, and we follow a girl and her mother who is a widow, and we are really immersed in a sort of viscerally dirty, uncomfortable, poor, ravaged world. And then all of a sudden there is a hunt for witches, and the way that the community is turned against itself and people are accused and they are taken off to be interrogated as witches, and it really sits in the disgustingness of the jail and of the poverty, the real like physicality of the grossness, and also the women's positions in society, women on their own being deemed as suspicious automatically, and really interesting relationships between women. Our main character has such a difficult relationship with her mother, who is clearly an alcoholic and abusive, but we see the ways that she ended up that way because of the society in which she lives as well. It is another one that is very much focused on the mundane and the minute. You stay with them for a very long time in their cell. Puritanical religion and control that is becoming more prevalent throughout the country at this time, and the man in charge of that, his own wanting to control himself, his own lusts, his own connections with the women. It is really beautifully written. A.K. Blakemore is a poet, and I think that's another thing that really helps things to stick in my mind. There is wonderful use of the historical language in a way that feels authentic without feeling over the top or ununderstandable, incomprehensible. Power relationships, wealth and education are all really important in here as well, and done really subtly. I really enjoyed that. The final book on my list is a collection of short stories, and that is Things We Lost in the Fire by Marian Ana Enriquez. This is translated from the Spanish by Megan McDowell, and these are a collection of short stories set in Argentina that are all strange, haunting, kind of horror ghost stories. There are a lot of ghosts and things haunting Argentina in this book. Ghosts often related to the dictatorship. For example, there is a house where there are ghosts and these two young girls are involved with the ghosts, and it turns out that the house was used by the army during the dictatorship to kill a lot of people. They are really uncomfortable, really dark little tales that leave you feeling at the edge of your seat. They have that thrill that you get from horror, the reason that you read horror. I think there is that dark thrill, and a lot of the images from this book have really stuck with me. There is one about a woman's obsession with her next door neighbour and what's going on over there that has really stuck in my mind as well. And it is again the organised crime and the casual violence of Buenos Aires. It lies side to side with this magical, weird, dark horror, and there is a serial killer, and so the scars left by the dictatorship and the prevalence of organised crime are shown alongside these fantastical, occult, ghostly elements that reflect and reinforce the horrors and the scars left in the minds of the Argentinian people. They're really weird, dark little gothic book stories that really deal with that feeling of the eerie and the uncomfortable, and that is why I think they really stuck with me. That and the beautiful visual imagery, beautiful and disgusting at the same time. Those are 10 books that I think will fuck with your head and stick with you, maybe for quite a while. Books that have really made their way into my head, whether through images or ideas. They're all a bit dark, a bit weird, and a bit magical, and I think that is what helped them to stick with me so well. I hope you found some recommendations for books you would be interested in reading, and I would always love to hear some weird, creepy little dark books from you in the comments down below, as I'm always looking to read more of that. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week for the most part, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.